There is no subject that is more important for you young people to be thinking about and to take a stand on than the subject of sex. We're going to be talking today about the issues surrounding abstinence. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Professor Mark Canister from Gordon College and Mr. Bruce Cook, president of the RAFA Southeast from Atlanta.
Right.
Glad to have you here today. The subject of sex now and abstinence. What is the difference between abstinence and safe sex?
Safe sex, it seems to me, at best, is a physical term that perhaps somehow there are methods in which young people can have safe sex that will prevent them in some degree from venereal disease, to some degree from pregnancy, but all of those things have their own failure rates, which Bruce is more aware of than I am and can speak to a little bit. But safe sex only deals with those physical kinds of things. It doesn't deal with any emotional issues. And abstinence takes a whole look at not only the physical issues, but also the spiritual issues and the emotional issues and all of the issues that really come to play when such a strong hormone is released when we start dealing with sex.
If I was a teenager today, why would I even be interested in abstinence?
Well, first of all, abstinence sounds horrible, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, it sounds like I'm being
sounds-
asked to abstain from something that should be fun, but I think abstinence to me is a choice. And I would define it this way: it's a choice to do what is best for me in the long run. And what's best for me in the long run is to abstain. That means to not be involved sexually before I find that perfect person. We think's perfect, never is perfect, but the right person for me, and enter into a monogamous, long-term relationship and marriage. So it's simply a teenager making a choice, much like a teenager going out for an athletic team would make a choice to get in shape, go to bed early, work real hard, because they know that if they do all those things, there's a reward out there. And so I think in the sexual area, abstinence, while it sounds bad, is extremely positive. It's saying, I want to choose to do what's best for me in the long run.
Now, Mark mentioned the word emotionally involved. What did you mean by being emotionally involved with abstinence?
Well, sex is in many ways a drug, and it can have very powerful consequences with the mind and the emotions. It's much more than just a physical act. You never forget your sexual experiences. They stay with you for a long time because it is such a powerful experience. And when you're engaging in sex with someone or multiple partners over a period of time, there can be long-lasting effects that are really difficult to overcome as you move from partner to partner. And as Bruce suggested, once you find that lifelong mate, you start to run into emotional comparisons between partners that you had previous to your marriage. And most marriages, when it comes to troubles and downfalls in marriages, those can be related directly back to previous sexual experiences that one or both of the marriage partners had with other couples before they got married.
Oh, go ahead.
Let me build on what you're saying. I think the key thing here is that when you are involved sexually, you're giving part of yourself to another person.
Exactly.
And an analogy I like to use is if you took a Band-Aid and put it on your arm and pulled it off, you would feel it was sticking. But then if you put it back again and try to take it off again, it would stick less. And if you did that a third time, it would have less stickiness, and a fourth and fifth time. In other words, your capacity to bond with somebody emotionally long-term decreases the more you're giving of yourself in a promiscuous environment. And I think that's what you're saying. It's extremely devastating emotionally long-term to be giving the intimacy of yourself to another person without the bonds of marriage.
Yeah, you are constantly giving yourself away
Right.
to someone, and the choice that you have to make is, are you going to give a little bit of yourself away to a whole lot of people,
Yeah.
or are you going to give all of yourself away to one person, which will build that bond extremely strong, if you still have a lot to give away when you finally find that person that hopefully God has brought into your life.
Well, we're going to hear what some young people have to say about how relationships are hurt by having sex before marriage.
If you just spend all your time, kissing or whatever, then you're not going to be talking to the person. You're not going to be sharing, experiences with them.
We often think that getting further in the relationship is getting further sexually. If there were a highest goal in a relationship, it would be to have sex.
You realize that a big part of why that person wants to be with you is just because you have a body. And not to say that they don't love you for all that's going on inside of your head and how nice you are and how fun you are and everything, but just the fact that they can't love you just because you're nice and just because you're fun and just because you're a great person, but because it has to include sex. It really affects your self-worth a lot.
Premarital relationship just causes so many expectations. The times that you spent together before just enjoying one another and appreciating one another become times when you're thinking, oh, I wonder if we'll have sex tonight. So many people deal with, especially women, the concerns of pregnancy and just go through weeks worrying, anxiety, and it adds so many tensions that the relationship is broken.
I think also that having a physical relationship, just speaking from personal experience, is that it really detracts from a man's view, from my view of a woman as a whole person. And women have so much more to offer than sex. Sex is a wonderful thing, but women are so beautiful on the inside. They have so much more to offer us than just physical beauty. I went to high school in Sweden where sex was even more rampant than here, and I grew up kind of living the expectation that people had over there that that's what you would do. I left that society after 4 years in Sweden, coming back to the United States as a senior in high school, feeling about as empty as I could. There was nothing left in my heart. There was no more emotion. Everything was cold. You look at people as objects. People were not people, they were things.
Then why is it so hard to wait?
Curiosity.
Okay.
Hello.
It just feels good.
Just feels good.
It's that instant gratification type thing.
In our short vision, we say, okay, this is what I'm going to do this because it does feel good for the pleasure, but also to fit in.
Even on TV now, you can see almost sexually explicit scenes. And that's just kind of like culture says that's okay. Society says that's all right. It's expected. You meet someone and you're attracted to them, then you want to be with them in a physical way.
Not only is it shown all the time on TV and movies, but it's shown so it's like the best thing in the world. There's nothing better than it.
That's pretty strong stuff.
It is. It's just like Bruce was saying with the Band-Aid example. The more you get into it and the more you do it just for the physical pleasure, it just becomes rote, and people just become objects and things and objects of desire, and we end up prostituting ourselves, just like prostitutes on the street do, just in order to get money, and people do it just for pleasure and gratification, but sooner or later the gratification wears off and it just becomes something that we do because it's Friday night or it's Saturday night or we think it's expected of us.
And I think the key in watching that is you have students talking about what they're really looking for in life, which is meaningful relationships. A meaningful relationship with God, a meaningful relationship with each other. And we get, like you say, Mark, we get taken down the side path that if we'll get involved sexually, we can have a meaningful relationship. And yet you hear the students saying, but I've done that, and when I do, I don't end up with a meaningful relationship. To me, the analogy would be that if you're an orchestra leader and you're trying to tune the orchestra, you would never start with the bass drum. In fact, what's the instrument that that they use to tune the whole orchestra with?
The violin.
The violin. They take the finest instrument and they take the violin and you start tuning from that so that eventually you work through the woodwinds, the brass, and back to the bass and all that. And a relationship would be the same way. You want to start with the areas that are sensitive, that you need to develop, that you need to work on, communication, getting to know each other. Then in marriage you move into those areas like the bass drum, which has a lot of emotion and a lot of attachment, strong feelings. But if you start there, you'll never be able to back in and tune the other relationships. So I think these kids are right on when they're saying you can't get to meaningful relationships through the sexual gate alone.
Exactly.
Can't do it.
several of them, especially the two gals, talked about friendships and how important it was to build that friendship. And I just think that that's so important. That's what my wife told me when we were dating, that we had to be friends first, and that she wanted to marry her best friend. She didn't want to marry somebody that had all these expectations of what society calls a husband, but she wanted to marry a best friend. And I think that teenagers today, if they would spend a little bit more time developing that friendship, they'll be able to figure out whether that's someone they really want to stay with for the long haul, long term.
And did you listen to that one girl talk about how she felt, or perhaps could feel, if she got involved sexually, that the guy was just interested in her?
Right.
Girls that become sexually involved before marriage have a 6-fold increase in suicide attempts. And the reason for that is that they've given themselves, they think it's a meaningful relationship, only to discover it was lust, not love. And therefore they feel badly about themselves. Their sense of self-worth is drawn way down. So it's just a devastation, especially with the girl. I think the girls are especially vulnerable here. So the idea of waiting is extremely important.
And that's exactly the opposite of what I think it was Brian in the clip there was saying. TV and movies tell us that if you have sex, and if you're sexually active, and if you're beautiful, and if you're the cover girl, that will raise your self-esteem. But in reality, we know it lowers your self-esteem. And today, teenagers have it harder than they've ever had it before in waiting for marriage that length of time.
Well, Mark, in the olden days, way back, marriages took place much sooner in life. Kids reached puberty, and 2 or 3 years later they got married. Now that's no longer true. What have you found in your studies?
Well, there's a twofold effect. One is biological, and one is social. I mean, biologically, 150 years ago, puberty didn't hit until about 15 or 16 years of age. Puberty keeps dropping younger and younger. We keep using the number around 12, which is fairly accurate. But it even is lower than 12 now. We're down into the 10.5 range and the 11.1 range. So puberty keeps coming earlier and earlier biologically. At the same time, socially, in our technological society, where we keep asking people to go to school longer, get more advanced degrees so they can get better jobs, marriage keeps coming later and later and later, so that the average age of marriage today is somewhere up around 25, 26, 27 years of age. So you have this huge span of at least 10 years between the time that kids are ready physically to have sex and the time that most of them are going to get married. So you've got a decade that you have to really figure out how you're going to deal with these hormones that are going crazy in your body, yet at the same time, within our society that we've created, you're not ready to get married yet. And that's why teenagers have to think intelligently about this and how they're going to deal with it, because it's not just a real nice, easy way to go as it once was. You were 14 years of age and puberty kicked in, and then you got married the next year and everything fit together very nicely. We have this whole gap now called adolescence, and we have to figure out how to deal with it.
The key word that you said there was that kids need to think ahead.
Yeah.
And it isn't something you just decide Saturday night on the couch. You have to have thoughts about it ahead of time and talk about it with your friend.
In fact, if you don't sit down and make that choice ahead of time, you will drift into some very negative consequences. Again, one of the girls referred to the possibility of waking up the next morning, did I get pregnant? The fear, the concern.
Well, what are the pressures, Bruce, that are on young people today?
Well, like Mark said, the hormones kick in. You just have to be a normal, healthy, red-blooded teenager, and suddenly you feel sexually attracted. So that's right at the top. As they pointed out, media, all you have to do is turn anything on that's in any form of media, and you're not only sexually being suggested that that's a good way to go, but sexually explicit. And then the caricature, the Pretty Woman, remember that movie?
Yes.
Here's a prostitute that looks like the glamorous person in the world, but if you go out and interview prostitutes, you see that that's not how they live, but yet that the media has. Peer pressure. Teenagers especially are encouraging. I've tremendous pressure to be sexually active. It's the one-upsmanship. It's the, have you scored yet?
No.
And if you haven't, what's wrong with you? And then I think the self-esteem issues. Girls especially are looking for love and acceptance and relationship, especially from their dad. And if that love is not being given in an emotional component, they're going to go to other guys and look for it. The problem is if they look for it sexually, they're going to be disappointed. And so you have this attempt to use sex in order to meet deep self-worth needs. And that's a vicious cycle. It's almost like an addiction, because I'll try it, but afterwards I'll feel worse. So then I'll do it again to feel better, but afterwards I'll feel worse and I'll do it again. And so I'm addicted now to the physical act, but all the time I'm pulling myself down. I feel horrible inside.
Sure. And the male role model is a huge issue,
Yeah.
because there are so many young girls today growing up without a father because the divorce rate is so high. And most of them end up living with their mothers, and they have no male role model, so they go to
That's right.
whatever guys they can to try and find happiness and self-esteem and acceptance.
And all a guy has to do is say, if you really love me, we'll have sex. And that emotionally starved girl will say, oh, you bet. The guy's thinking lust, she's thinking love, and the next morning she's devastated.
I'd like to go back and pick up on the word you said earlier about addiction, and you've got to have more of it, and you've got to more and more and more. It is never enough. We talked with a young man a little while ago, and he told us exactly that and how it worked in his life. Let's listen to what Brian has to say on the subject of addiction with sex.
It's kind of like, you know, you just have sex with a girl, and then, you know, after you have sex with her a few times, it's kind of like, you know, you want, you know, something new, because it's like, you know, you think the most beautiful girl, you know, be the best sex, but then after a while, it's just kind of like you get used to it, and then, you know, you want somebody new, and it's kind of like you're not, and after a while, you get to feel like, you know, this person that you're having sex with isn't even another person. It's you know, it's just like somebody you're just, you know, like just another thing that you're having sex with. And it's like you don't even view them as a human being. So after a while, you get you start feeling kind of like guilty about it and stuff like that.
I was just going to say, how did you feel about it yourself? What were your emotions?
Well, I would say that it's kind of like you feel guilty, but you feel like, you know, because you want the pleasure from it, you know, but then, so you try to push your feelings down, push your guilt and push your shame behind so that, like, you cover it up, and then you're just having, you know, this physical sex, but it's not, there's no, like, emotional attachment. You detach yourself emotionally from the person completely. I think human beings, they look for like an eternal good, something that's going to fill them completely. I think that eternal good is God, you know, and He's the only one that can fill you completely. But if you don't realize that and you don't have God filling you, then you look to other things. You look to drugs or money or, you know, possessions, or you look to sex. You know, different people pick different things. And, you know, you try to, when it doesn't fill you, then you feel empty, and so you try to do it again and again until you know, you find something that'll fill you completely, but it never does.
Brian mentioned two things, guilt and emptiness. That's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, what really came through there is he was describing what I would call physical sex alone. And it's interesting, in the Bible, when God gives us a negative, quite often we interpret that as a prohibition, but really it's a protection. It's a protection from the experiences like Brian is having, because sex is not physical alone. It is emotional and spiritual. Now, I have a garden in front of my house that we continually try to grow perennial flowers in. And it's amazing what happens if you do not have water and fertilizer and get it laid out right. Nothing grows well. I mean, you come and look at that garden, and especially this time of year, it's dying, and you say, well, what's wrong? Well, you didn't use the right ingredients, dummy. You didn't put the water in. And sex is the same way. You can't just pick up sex in the abstract physically and say, this is what life's all about. God intended that garden to be the confines of marriage so that you can have commitment to each other, so you can go to bed knowing that everything's okay, it's safe. Then the garden grows and flourishes. So I think what Brian was saying is describing the difference between a prohibition and a protection. Mm-hmm. So that when you do get married, you have the assurance of a quality relationship where sex is significant. It can be developed and encouraged and grown in. And that's where God's wisdom comes in. And Satan always will come along and try to shortcut us by saying, you can have it now. You know, you don't need that. But yet you listen to Brian and you see, if you choose the shortcut, you're going to be shortchanged.
I'd like to talk about the myth of safe sex. Just what do we mean by that, and what is it going to do with the kids?
I think the way I would define it is it's a message that's out there across the country today that says you can have sex and not really experience any negative consequences as long as you use a condom. And it is a myth, and it's not the truth. I think there's three components that the kids need to understand when they hear about this safe sex concept. First is the emotional. We've talked about that there's not a condom that covers the heart. So every time that you give sexually, you're hurting your inner self and your ability to relate to another person. But then there's the whole physical aspect. And when I was growing up, when adults used condoms in marriage for birth control, you know what they were called? Parents.
Really?
In other words, the failure rate was like 15% for married couples that wanted to use condoms for birth control. They had them right beside their nightstand. They followed all the instructions, but it was 15%, which meant you ended up having kids. Now they're trying to tell us that you can take condoms and use them to prevent pregnancy among teenagers and the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, and you won't have any consequences. And every study that I've seen showed that the failure rate for condoms among teenagers and your ability to use a condom to prevent pregnancy and the spread of sexually transmitted disease is in excess of 20 to 30%.
That's even higher then.
Much higher. What that means is if I get on a plane and I'm going to have a safe flight from Atlanta to Boston, but the failure rate is 20 to 30%, you need to put me in an institution. It's not a safe plane. It's a risky plane. And that's what the issue is with condoms. They're made of rubber. They fail, they break, they slip. You can't use them right. And so if you're using a condom to think I'm not going to have to worry about pregnancy, then you have a great risk. Thirdly, there are many sexually transmitted diseases that are not covered by the condom. Chlamydia is the most common spread sexually transmitted disease among teenagers. A study at Rutgers University showed there was absolutely no difference between kids that used condoms and those that did not. They both equally contracted chlamydia, which later on as an adult can prevent you from ever getting pregnant. And one of the problems with some of these diseases is that there's no symptoms. So you can be with your good friend or person that you, quote, are going with, thinking everything's okay, and that person can have the disease passing it to you. So there is no such thing as safe sex. If you get involved sexually, even with a condom, there's very high risk.
Yeah, and the indirect messages that kids get through the TV and the movies, again, keep saying that there are no consequences. We see people on soap operas and the nighttime soaps and in the movies having sex all the time, but very seldom do they get AIDS or chlamydia or pregnant. And when even if they do contract one of these diseases or they get pregnant, in a half an hour it's solved and there's no more problems. So the long-term behavioral risks that students are taking by having sex really aren't coming out in the media when we watch TV.
Well, we're going to listen to an interview that I had with a young man in New York City. Clint Owens talks about the fact that there are definitely consequences to casual sexual encounters.
I had met a model when I was living in Italy, this guy who was this California guy, and he was working like crazy, and he had his girlfriend in Paris, his surfboard in Paris, and he'd go to Biarritz to surf, and he was flying all over the place. And I thought in my heart, if I could be something, if I could achieve that, if I could be flying around as much and go to Biarritz to catch some waves and do all those things, that would truly make me happy. Well, though I came to Europe as a Christian, that, I guess as I got more sucked into the fashion world, my faith really started becoming secondary, and if you will, my God or whatever, my faith was in my work. You know, the more I worked, the more I felt better about myself, and it wasn't really based on what God was doing in my life. So anyways, about a year and a half later, I was in the same scenario. I was living in Paris now. I was flying between Milan and Italy and other places often, and would go down to Biarritz and catch waves. I had a girlfriend in Paris, and I wasn't happy at all. I was really unhappy because I achieved everything. God wasn't in my heart, and I was really lonely, and not lonely in like a physical way because I had my girlfriend, but just something was missing. And it was frustrating to me. For me personally, it was sex, the physical parts of the relationship were always damaging for me. Back then, you know, you're lonely or you're whatever, and you try to fill that void again. And I've always found it to be very damaging because I think it really shortened the relationships for sure. Because I guess in my heart I knew it was wrong. And it created, you know, hurt and pain. I think because the physical relationship God has created, I think when you get married it's natural and it works together well. It's just perfect. But outside that, I think it's so unbalanced that even now I have to, I'm not physically involved with anybody. I mean, I have a girlfriend, but it's not physical. But it's like, even still, there's like, I guess I have anxious thoughts because of the past, the physicalness. You know, I don't want that to come into my life anymore. I don't want that to be in my life now because I don't want it to mess up anything. Because, I mean, the girl that I'm seeing is very important to me, and I don't want any of that to come in and mess up what God maybe will do. I mean, not in the future, but what He may be doing, and it's by God's strength too. It's not like I'm Superman, like not tempted or I'm not enticed. But I mean, it doesn't cross my mind. But I know better because I've been there before, and I know the pain it would leave me, and it means so much more to me to be married with a wife and kids for 50 years than a moment with somebody that's just going to be nothing. You know, I mean, forget about it. It doesn't even interest me. I mean, not that I don't have blood running through my veins, but that I know that the long-term relationship would be so much more beautiful. Yeah.
What did you think about what Clint said, Mark?
Well, Clint raised a number of very interesting issues. And one of which is God's grace. And he didn't use those words, but here's a guy who really went off track and was living the great lifestyle in Paris, so he thought, and yet was able to come back, and God found him, and he found God, and he found forgiveness in that. And so I would want teenagers to understand that it really is never too late to become abstinent. You've never done anything that's too wrong that God can't forgive you for. Yet at the same time, he also mentioned that there are consequences that he still is dealing with from his previous episodes. And as he looks to his girlfriend now and the possibilities of marriage in the future, he's concerned about how those previous sexual episodes will affect that. So it's a very dangerous fire that we're playing with when we talk about sex. But teenagers need to understand that they can be forgiven and they can start right where they are today to move forward into a healthy sexual relationship.
Boy, I totally agree with that. God's grace is sufficient, but abstinence is a choice.
Yeah.
And you can make that choice wherever you are in whatever situation you're in today and move forward from there and let God work with you to heal you if there's some hurt there. But God's grace is always sufficient.
Yeah.
We're going to see what the Gordon students that we heard from earlier, what they have to say as a bit of advice for teens today.
Don't limit yourself to just spending time together alone. Go out and have fun with your friends.
Don't be afraid to talk about sex. It's not a taboo. It's something God created.
Don't be afraid to just say, you know, I don't know about this, and don't untuck anything, don't unzip anything, don't unbutton anything.
A person once challenged me to put as much into my mind about the Lord as the world puts in my mind about sex.
It's a challenge.
Excellent.
And that was a huge challenge, and still is a huge challenge to do that.
Pretend God's always in the back seat with you. Know yourself. Know your own weaknesses. I mean, you know where you're going to be weak. Talk about them with someone you're on a date. I mean, if you're dating someone, say, you know, I'm going to get weak when you start to move like that. Or if we go to a dance and you start dancing really sexually, I'm going to get real turned on. Don't put yourself in a position that you know you're going to fall.
Just work with each other's strengths and weaknesses, and as you spend time with each other, you'll learn those strengths and those weaknesses. And if you really love that person, you'll respect them. And when you know that they're weak, you'll use your strengths to help overcome their weaknesses.
Love is not that we would drop our pants for a friend.
All that time and energy you put into exerting yourself on getting ready for the date, getting ready to for the moment, you know, bringing somebody out, hanging out, and the times you spend with women, I have taken those and spent those times with the Lord, and your relationship gets so enriched with the Lord through that. You grow closer to the Lord, and and He is able to love them better through you.
What do you have to say on that, Bruce?
That's some great advice. I'd add two pieces of advice. Number one is I'd write it down. I would treat it as a decision I'm going to make, that I'm choosing to be abstinent until marriage. Write it down, record it. And secondly, find one or more same-sex friends that share that commitment as an accountability group. You cannot go through this thing alone, and have some people to whom you're accountable. When you come back from a date, they're going to ask you what happened. And if you know you got accountability, it's going to help you reinforce your decision. And I would add that to what they shared.
Yeah, the decision has to come up front. You can't make the decision
Right.
when you're in the middle of the act. When Joseph was being tempted by Potiphar's wife, he had made a decision long before that happened to get out of the situation, and he fled. He took off. And I think young people today need to be willing to make that kind of a radical commitment, to flee the situation when they get into it, and to make that decision, as Bruce said, long before that comes along, because I know it's going to come along for each one of them. But they've got to make that decision up front.
In order to experience God's best.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, and the other thing would be to really know who they are in Christ. You know, Joseph knew who he was in Christ, and today we have a lot of yo-yo faith out there. My faith is this on Sunday morning, my faith is committed to this on Monday, it's committed to this on Tuesday. We need to get a strong foundation in our faith.
We need to get a strong foundation in our faith, and abstinence is possible if your faith is in God. Did you know that if you build your self-esteem and your confidence, you don't have to do the things you don't want to do just to gain acceptance? Sheriff Jack DeMille, Barnstable County Sheriff, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
John Clarendon, you're the Program Director for the Sheriff's Youth Activities. Welcome. And David French, Peer Leadership Program for the Regional High School. Glad you're here today. We're talking about building self-esteem, and we're talking about getting confidence and how that can help the kids. John, you talk to a lot of people, young people every day. What are they saying to you? What do they want help with?
Well, I think they're just looking for a positive, where they fit in life, really. They're looking for experiences. They're looking for some sort of positive experiences. We're saying don't do drugs and don't do this and putting all kinds of limits on them, but I think they're really looking for a positive connection with just where am I supposed to be in the world and what can I do?
Are they lost? Are they feeling kind of lost in the shuffle? They want to belong to something?
Well, I think some are, but I don't think it's, most people don't want to admit that. I think that gets covered over, that there's a layer of denial where, everybody has to act like they know what they're doing and act like they're okay. But the problem is underneath that, there can be a lot of trouble going on. You said at the beginning, if you have self-esteem, well, what is that? But if you have good feelings about yourself, yeah, you don't have to add the chemicals to try to feel better. But everybody acts like they're okay, but underneath it, they can be really scared, angry.
Well, what does peer leadership program do to make me, if I'm in your peer leadership program, how am I going to feel better?
Well, sometimes when I get home after a workshop, I say to my wife, honey, I shrunk the school. That kids get into learning about one another and discovering that some of their thoughts are universal thoughts, or at least can be found elsewhere, so they feel less alone, less strange, less peculiar, and discover the universality. I had a kid several years ago do a workshop. It was a weekend workshop. And the following Monday, she reported to her, it's hard to send kids home from these workshops and have them, I'd love to be a fly on the wall and have them hear them describe it to their parents, because I don't think they can. But the kid after Monday in school went home and shared with her mother, for the first time in a year, she was a freshman, late stage freshman year, for the first time in a year she walked from one end of Barnstable High School to the other and saw familiar faces. And as a result of that, she felt less alone and less alienated and less afraid in the school. That's the sort of stuff that John talks about, belonging to the bigger thing, feeling less alone in the bigger thing, and feeling okay about who you are within within the chaos that surrounds you.
Well, life is full of scary things right now. There's a lot going on in our world, and a lot of kids are coming from unstable households or dysfunctional families. Do you find that true?
What we find is that obviously that a lot of kids are coming from a home setting other than that which many of us grew up in. The traditional family with a father, mother, in a stable home environment when the child gets out of school isn't there. And so while we talk about peer leadership, there's another thing that's very important, and that is role models. And if we don't know instinctively what normal would be, what is appropriate because of the chaos that we grew up in, we somehow have to find a way to cultivate it. And one of the things that we missed, I think, in this generation, the age of television, is other mechanisms, vehicles that were available before. Now, I know that we have more dysfunction today, but for example, what we used to do is pick up books, and there were books like Tennyson's Idylls of the King, where there was a role model. There was the king with his knights, and if you recall, the king comes. He has no insignia that sets him apart, and he comes upon this woman on the highway that is sickly and is not attractive, and he offers her everything that he has up to half his kingdom, and all she has to do is choose to accept it. And the point that is in books like that and a million other books is obviously there's the Christian ethic.
What does it mean to empower a child to take these information things that they've been given and then build their self-esteem? How does that work?
Well, I think the sheriff was talking about being a participant in the experience. You know, kids are too much in the school are being given an education. They're being told what to do. It's a one-way kind of communication, and they don't have a sense of ownership about that. They're not. We expect them at the end of that.
The teacher's just telling them something, and
for the most part,
yeah.
Sit still, don't move, don't
Right.
talk. I'll give you the information, then you give it back to me. That's not really enough, and the whole sense of empowerment is having kids have a sense of ownership of something and something they're willing to be responsible for. And that's where that connection is, that they want to feel connected to something that's alive. For a lot of them, the school experience isn't alive. It's dead, and they feel dead.
That's
they feel
where you
angry.
come in with your peer leadership program.
I'm listening to a piece of this, and I'm guilty of looking out over the the apparent adult population of kids. You look at kids, and they look all grown up. And the reality is they're not all grown up.
They're kids inside.
They're kids inside, as I hope I still am. But they don't have solutions, and sometimes we don't teach them choices. Let's examine the choices. Sometimes we don't do that. We assume because they look grown up that they are grown up and that they have those answers. And what John's talking about is empowering the kids and making them responsible. But to be totally responsible, they need to know the options. They need to have examined the options. They need to have had some options presented to them.
And they need to practice being responsible. It's not like all of a sudden we cram the information and then poof, they're responsible. They have to practice and be able to make mistakes.
Well, that brings up what the sheriff said about role models, too. I mean, they've got to have a role model. If they're going to practice being responsible, they've got to see somebody that they live with or study with or go with who's also responsible.
That's part of it. And in the elementary school and maybe up into middle school, that's the adult has the most influence. But starting in middle school, especially for kids where the family isn't intact, and by high school, you know, who do people turn to first? Yeah, they are influenced by other people, but they're turning first, their lifestyle, the fabric of their day-to-day life is with their peers. So that's where we're trying to impact with these peer
So what do they do with all these
too.
feelings that they have? Teenagers are known to be bursting with feelings. How do they share their feelings with each other?
What's scary about feelings is that we tend to judge feelings. Bad feelings are bad, good feelings are good. And I make
You can't have bad feelings. You can only have good
deny
feelings.
those bad feelings.
Right.
And that's a horrible lesson, I think, to pass on to our kids. I really think that bad feelings are going to happen, good feelings are going to happen, and to stay away from judging them, but just learn to accept them, learn to go with them, learn to watch them have their own life and then cease to exist. That's so freeing and so liberating. Bad feelings are always going to happen, as are good feelings. I think that the painkiller ad that's on television, you get a cyclist going up Pikes Peak on his bicycle, and the body screams at him, I hurt, I hurt. The message we give to the kids, though, is don't listen to the pain, don't deal with the pain. take a pill, get back on the bike, and complete the task. The pains that Jack was talking about, the kids feel because they live in a dysfunctional family or because they feel different from the rest of the world or for whatever. Feelings are feelings.
And if you have bad feelings and you act out on them, we need to stop cushioning children from consequences, because the longer we shield them, the more they surface later on. And what we're finding in the prison system is people who have been told that they can be empowered, but they're not really responsible. And I think that the second half of the message is equally important to the first half, because if you're entitled to have any feelings that you want, and if you're entitled to be a being, then you also have to go with all of the consequences of that. And what we're finding too frequently is people coming into the consequential end of things as they become adults and saying, well, I didn't get that before.
We're going to see the Sheriff's Youth Ranch in operation, where you can learn self-confidence and build your esteem through teamwork and through trusting others.
At the Sheriff's Youth Ranch in Barnstable, Massachusetts, they build children with peer pressure, positive peer pressure.
Today we're going to be doing what's called low elements, and we're going to try to emphasize sort of the foundation of what we're doing, that we're trying to be positive with each other, a lot is about support, communication, teamwork. But we're going to try to really establish a foundation of being safe with each other, and so when we get into the higher elements where, if you're not scared, you know your body's going to be when you get 40 feet in the air. You start shaking. No, you're shaking your head. No fear, right? So how many people think they have no fear? Got a few people, no fear. Okay, good.
There was no fear for now, but as the course grew more difficult, that would change. The course begins on low elements, where the emphasis is on support and trust.
The object of this particular piece is to walk from here all the way down to the poles, the third pole down, without holding on to this. Spotters ready?
Spotters ready.
The young people realize they can't succeed without the support of the spotters.
Get your hands closer together.
Particularly when the elements get more risky.
Okay, see what happens?
The group learns teamwork as they have to pass through a rope wall without touching the ropes.
Do not touch it. Touch it. And we leave the two side holes.
You can't succeed without a plan, and so natural leaders emerge.
Retest that. Hold his feet and go through. I can't.
You ain't never getting
What was the leadership of this group? Who do you think helped lead the group through this?
George.
How do you feel like the group seeing you as a leader? Is that a good feeling?
To me, yeah. I tried my hardest to get him through. All right, Buddha. Come on. Get up there, Casey. Let's go, Casey.
Although in groups of young people, not everyone feels like a leader.
Now, how do you feel?
like a retard.
Why? You did it.
Yeah, but I feel bad for them.
As the group readies to face the high elements, they discover how much risk they're willing to take.
My courage is very little right now.
Like yesterday we did like 55-foot rappelling, so
Did you feel ready
this
for
is
today?
this is easy, yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna fall. Hold up. Yeah. I ain't touching no pole. I'm getting ready to fall. Shut up! I'm going down very fast.
Okay, what I want you to do is sit on that pole right there.
Sit?
No, hold that.
Lean back, my leg straight.
You got it.
All right, ready?
Yeah.
Hang with one hand, Frank. One hand.
Anytime you're ready.
By the end, the group has learned a lot.
You gotta have confidence in the person that's catching you. You gotta have confidence for jumping. Confidence.
Teamwork. I feel more confident. I don't think I could do any of this at first.
Now I can trust other people, and if I didn't think I could trust them before, and it's like more people can support me than I think. I thought I was scared of heights now, but I'm not as much as I was before.
and has grown closer through their experiences.
I've become closer friends with them.
Yeah.
Like all of them. I never really used to be like friends with Josh and Peter. Yeah, they support me. Because I didn't want to go on that one, they're like, it's easy, you can do it. So I went on it. I've done it 3 times.
I feel proud now because I did that high element right in front of me right there. I didn't think I would ever get along with these guys and stuff. I don't even know a couple of them, but now I do, and I like it. It's nice.
This positive peer pressure has boosted their self-esteem, making them stronger people.
That's a great film clip.
I want to do it. Can I come?
Definitely, we'll get you up there.
Cool.
Tell us about what you saw.
Well, you were talking about feelings, and some of the kids were saying at the beginning when we had them on the ground, I have no fear. And they really believe that because they're not in touch with their feelings. I have no fear. But when you get up 30, 40 feet in the air, you may not have fear up here, but your body starts telling you
Oh, yes.
something's going on.
I could feel it myself.
You can't move your hands. And
I know. And trust. And they showed
Exactly.
pictures of the kids had their arms, their hands crossed, and they were catching them, they were spotting for them. That must have been terrifying.
Some of the kids that were having the most trouble in school, getting in the most trouble, even on the ground, where we just have them close their eyes, put their hands over their chest and fall backwards, just standing on the ground, had trouble doing that, had trouble closing their eyes. So the kids who are getting in the most trouble, I think, have had that trust violated. They've been hurt or wounded the most and have the most trouble trusting people. So getting them up 30, 40 feet in the air is a great experience.
I thought the video was wonderful, and I've been sitting in prisons all these years and working in drug bureaus and the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, worried about John out there and wondering if he was doing okay, and he's having the time of his life.
Well, Sheriff, tell us how you started the program. What gave you the idea?
I think, well, first of all, there are youth ranches throughout the South and the Southwest. And what we did is we borrowed from some of their ideas, and we began some new ideas, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have seen other programs where kids get involved with a program as a means of identifying themselves and their relationship to other people. And when we saw them elsewhere, we realized that people had something. And so what we realized also was that a youth ranch with horses and animals and experiences such as the ropes course begin to cultivate things that in people that we'll never be able to do just by talking to them.
Why do you think this program is successful? How does it, and I understand it is very successful. What is making it that way?
Well, I think first of all, it includes the kids. It's not at them. I also believe that the experience can teach people far more than we can just by talking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the people that we've been able to hire, such as John, clearly have a rapport with these people.
Do you keep track of the kids, John? Those children that we saw on the show,
Yeah.
do you follow up with them? Do you have a program of follow-up?
Some of like this particular program we just did, we'll be having a field day where we'll be inviting the kids with their families and see if we can get some of their families up on the elements and let the kids really show off for their families.
Yeah.
And now that they're experts, they've done it. And we continue to work with the schools. Our commitment is ongoing. And what we're really looking for long-term is helping the kids be leaders who've been through these experiences. They can become peer leaders for other kids.
Well, that brings us into David's peer leadership program, and these kids that have had this experience can then teach younger children, and this is what you're doing.
I locked 72 kids in a gym.
72 kids locked up in a gym.
For a weekend training experience. From the 72 kids, we build 9 8-member teams.
9 8-member, that's wonderful.
Then they go into the middle school to work with incoming actually they don't. The middle school comes to the high school to work with the high school kids to address anxieties about coming to the high school. We call it a transition workshop, so that they don't carry their fantasies into the summer, so that they don't let those fantasies fester. I'm going to get my head stuffed down a toilet, I'm going to get beat on by a big kid. But it's not teachers telling middle school kids not to worry or being reassuring. It's high school kids
telling each other. Let's take a look at the clip and see. We're going to see what goes on in the peer leadership group.
When I first experienced it, I didn't exactly know what it was. I thought it was just the upperclassmen, telling the freshmen what school was going to be like when they got to the high school, but when I got here and I joined peer leadership, I learned that it was so much more.
You learn a lot about yourself, about others, how to convey thoughts and ideas, and I'd say that's what peer leadership is at heart. It's a common way of just treating other people, and if you treat people nicely, they'll treat you nicely. And it seems like something that should be natural to everyone, but when you look around in the world today, it's not. And it's a nice way that you can show that you still care about people and yourself.
We spend all this time in elementary school and middle school learning about the differences of people, and in peer leadership, it's bringing all those differences together and finding the real similarities in it. Peer leadership is really based on honesty. You really have to be honest with the person, and with that comes a lot of trust. I think most of us here trust each other with almost anything.
And just all the meetings, like different topics we have in meetings, like we learned problem solving and mediation skills at one. So just in later life, you can use all of it for whatever career you choose.
And going on to colleges next year, I think all of the seniors here are going to go on to college next year, or if we were going on to the workplace. Just taking with us, we've built our self-esteem up so much here that it will carry us through the next year.
I think it helps you to meet new people too, like going up to different people and like talking to them.
Most of the people see someone and they automatically make a judgment, and I think that's only natural. But if you're willing to take the next step and find out what the person's actually like, not just on the surface, you find out that you're a lot better for doing it, and it's probably something that is worthwhile.
Everybody's waiting for someone else to take the first step, but if you take it, it's what everybody else is waiting for, and if you might as well do it and make things a lot easier.
One of us is not as strong as all of us, and I think we all pretty much agree with that thought. Yep. We all came together and made a pretty good year.
Be yourself. Anything else just isn't worth it. Try not to judge people, because, like I said, whether you agree with them or not, you should at least accept them. And I find that if you do, it makes life a lot more interesting.
Two of the young people have joined us on the set. Welcome, Ed and Bianca. Thank you for coming and sharing with us. Ed, tell me a little bit about your background and what were some big decisions that you made?
In my middle school, I started running with some kids who I didn't really like, the wrong crowd, so to speak. It was really tough. We did lots of juvenile things, which I wasn't comfortable being around them, wasn't comfortable doing it, but I felt like I had no option, really. I mean, if I don't do this with them, then who am I going to be with? It was better to have fake friends than no friends.
Mm-hmm. And that was important to you, to have friends, to be with a part of something?
Yeah, exactly. If I did this and went out with them, at least I knew that someone would be with me, that I was kind of a part of something. You know,
So-
it was like, even the worst things you did, it was kind of like you got respect for once.
So
And-
what happened?
It really started getting bad towards like my 8th grade year. Like they were getting into pot and LSD, alcohol and whatnot. I didn't have many like real role models, and all I knew was I didn't want to be around them. So like, it wasn't easy. The whole summer, I just like isolated myself. Didn't go with them, didn't go with anyone else, hoping that like transition into the high school I could just ditch this reputation.
How did you feel?
Scared.
This was a choice you made? Mom and Dad didn't tell you can't hang around with these kids?
Well, Mom and Dad were like really unsure about me. They saw me getting in trouble, they saw me doing this. Mom was here and Dad was here, so they often weren't getting along. It wasn't like the healthiest home situation.
But you made a choice not to hang around with the kids versus somebody imposed that choice on you?
I made that choice. They told me not to, but they couldn't like really stop me. And all I knew was I just didn't want to be around those kids anymore. So it was like just a leap of faith. And it worked out. You can do it. You can like change yourself.
You learned trust, just as the children that we saw on the TV. How about you, Bianca?
Well, also coming into high school was a big change for me. I had some friends in 8th grade who I thought they were my friends, but I started making new friends and they didn't like my new friends, so I couldn't deal with it anymore. So I broke myself off from them. I wasn't mean or anything, but I just couldn't hang around with them anymore. They weren't who I wanted to be with, and I really didn't have a life or whatever with them, so I had to find myself in other people.
Now, what kind of experiences were positive experiences for you once you got to the high school? Was peer leadership one of the experiences? Or?
Yeah, very.
I got into several things as soon as I could. Anything that they weren't doing. I did drama, I did sports, I got involved in Civil Air Patrol, as many things as I could. And then this year I got involved with peer leadership, and it's been like a really huge learning experience.
So what I hear you saying is that you've got to get out and do something, take an active step. Bianca, you took an active step in changing friends too, making sure that you got involved with a different group. Did you find some support in a peer leadership kind of program?
Yeah, the peer leadership was great. At our Words Not Weapons workshop, we're like getting through like life without violence, talking through it instead of going into all the fighting. When we got there, it was kind of like everyone was different. You know, no one really was very good friends with anyone else. It kind of reminded me of the movie The Breakfast Club. And at the beginning, we didn't really know what to say. We didn't know what people were going to think of us. And at the end, we were just one big happy family. And we're all still friends. I still talk to everyone that was in the group. It was great.
Now, you did a piece, and you learned something very significant from that one.
Yeah, ever since I've been doing peer leadership, it's just been a major learning experience. In the Words Not Weapons, I come from a very competitive family. Everything's right or wrong. You win or I win, first and second. In this, I'd always heard about people, you know, agreeing to disagree, but I've never seen practice. I saw it practice there. These two people came from about as opposite views as you could. And it was just one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. He said something, it was just completely opposite. And she goes, well, that's okay, but I see it as this. And he's like, oh, that's cool. Neither of them said that they were wrong, neither of them competed. They just agreed and accepted each other's view, and that was the coolest thing I picked up from that. It's not so much an outward learning experience, it's really inward learning experience and social tools and morals.
Mm-hmm. And as your self-confidence builds, then you're able to reach out to others and carry that with you. So people see something in you that they want, and then they'll follow you. You become a leader in a good way.
Yeah. I wish it had been there earlier, because I know I wasn't the only kid who wanted to change. But you don't know if you can, really. You've been pinned like this, you've been labeled like this. You don't know if there's actually such a thing as stable or normal, or people who will accept you for just you. It's really hard.
So what age do you think, for both of you, do you think you could have start benefiting from peer leadership kinds of experiences?
6th grade.
6th grade?
You don't even have to go any further. 6th grade was it.
Yeah.
You're getting into the middle school, kids are separating themselves into what that, and then there's the kids who aren't so-called accepted. A lot of us, I don't know if it's just parent or not, didn't come from the best home lives, and we were mad at everybody and everything for no reason.
Do you think as high school students you can help create some experiences for 6th graders?
Yeah.
I was in the transition and Words Not Weapons, where we have been going to middle school, trying to reinforce positive attitudes and views. Not necessarily preaching, but saying, these are the choices we've made, these are choices you actually can make.
Choices, that's a good word. You can make choices. You can take control of your life and make good choices. Follow that dream that you have. Make the choice to make your life different. You don't have to go with the flow. What do you believe in, just for yourself, not because anybody told you? There are other people out there in the world and our actions affect others. We're talking about values today. Reverend J. Anthony Lloyd, Assistant Dean at Gordon College, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Mrs. Linda McKay, you're the director of the PrEP program in St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Mr. Brad Curl, president of Athletes in Business for Kids. Glad to have you here today. We're talking about values. What are some of your values?
Oh, I'm into integrity, respect. That's important, no doubt about it to me.
I really like the idea of being real and also valuing the bigger picture, not just, my little thing here, and but really trying to see the bigger picture and being real.
Perseverance and caring. I think especially caring. If I don't spend time during the day caring for someone at some point, then I feel I haven't lived up to what I need to do.
Do you think that these values that we've just talked about are in operation today? Or have we lost some of them? What's happening with the kids?
Well, I think they're in operation today. I think that at times we have to possibly dig a little bit harder, but I like to think that at times that's what you do. You dig for gold, and you eventually find a goal that's there. But there, at the same time, there are a number of competing things out there that sort of overshadow them, so that we don't always go out and start the morning saying, okay, what kind of value I'm going to have today? That's not a part of who we are, I don't think.
Seems like we've sort of settled for what some are calling a cheap industrial ingredient in entertainment. A lot of sex, violence, anarchy, cheap stimuli, if you would, and doesn't really lead us anywhere. Degrades us rather than builds us up. And we have a whole entertainment environment that's pummeling kids with cheap sex, indiscriminate
So they're
violence.
getting one message from the media, for instance, the movies or the television, and parents are trying to teach something else at home. And which side is going to win out? Do you find that true, Linda?
True, and I think it's not only the entertainment media. I think it's the news that they hear. What they visually see right now is a constant message that people aren't honest, yet they're being told to be honest. What they see is that people are successful. A lot of times are ones that aren't honest. So if success is financial gain, then they're getting very mixed messages, I think, on a consistent basis of what is something that we should value.
In working with the schools and the parents in St. Louis, have you found that parents are trying very hard to teach kids?
Parents, teachers, administrators, it's a very community effort that we have to find a way to clearly define positive values for our kids. And we call them positive character traits. When a child leaves school, what character traits do we really want them to know and understand and act on? And the key is people coming together and talking about what is that value and what does it stand for. A lot of times we found a lot of our children, especially our high school kids, you'd ask them what courage is. Well, that was to stand up and defend yourself if someone's going to hit you or shoot you. And so we got them to start talking about what is positive courage then. So that is something that we really do see happening in St. Louis.
Have you found, Brad, with your program is to, as I understand, to bring athletes into the schools to talk with the kids? When your athletes come into the schools, what are they finding?
Well, it's fun to be with athletes. Kids love sports, and they bring a big old football player into school, and everybody's excited. And if the athlete is a good communicator and can communicate in a very personal, genuine way, traditional values and a hopeful message and a Christian message as well, the kids love it, the teachers love it, they're all running after us. That was the greatest program we ever had. I don't think we need to stand on the edges of this cultural war we're in. We're in a war for values, and there's a lot of bodies on the field. I mean, you talk about the kids with overdoses and the kids with suicides and the pregnant teenagers and the sexually transmitted disease cases that are, just epidemic among the kids. We're in a battle, and the bodies are on the field, and we've got to teach kids to get in there and mix it up and fight this fight and get equipped to fight it properly, because there's no such thing as standing on the sidelines. You're going to get killed if you stand on the sidelines. You got to get in there and fight it. You're in the midst of it.
I think it's amazing the fact that in this day and age that so many of our teenagers are in the midst of that, and there's still some gold out there in the midst of it. I mean, I'm always surprised in running into a teenager, whether it's a teenager at my church or whether I'm talking to a freshman coming into college, and the surprising in terms of their ability in the midst of all that to sort out some things. I sort of at times say to myself, well, I'm very thankful I'm not a teenager today.
Yes, I've said the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thankful for that. One of the things recently I was surprised, one of the things I do at my church is that we challenge them to do some research and look at pathfinders and looking for individuals and characteristics that they find appealing in that person and be able to research or interview that person, dig through that, and then share that with a larger congregation. And this was something that we shared in my church and found it extremely helpful. And then a couple of weeks ago, talking with a friend of mine who's a rabbi in the next town over, he took that same concept that we shared and tried it with his high school teenagers who were Jewish. And his surprise of what they zeroed in on, some characteristics. One talked about a person who, at that particular time, they were dying. And yet they zeroed in on some qualities about that particular person who was dying, and yet they could identify with that person. Those kinds of things that somehow maybe in the rush of everything else we miss, because they're all bombarded. We're all bombarded with all this.
Well, Linda, I wanted, in touching on what J. Anthony just said, you found that your kids are bombarded. You said they're bombarded too in St. Louis. So you had started the PrEP program, which is to bring character education to the kids. Have you found that your children, there's a good positive response to?
Very much when you have children sitting down actually defining the values as much as you're asking the adults to, which is what he just said. And I know that PrEP involves 25 public school districts in St. Louis, but in my personal life, I've taken a lot of things that we are doing with the kids in the school to the kids that I work with at church on Sunday. And we asked them to define what their top values were. Then we asked them as a group to take those and share them. They did it personally for themselves and picked their top 5. Then we said as a group, all right, you know, your friends here, what is it that you think is important? And it would really be consistently that the same would start coming to the top. Their friends, personal freedom, which is a great thing I hear the kids saying in high school, and I understand that.
What does personal freedom mean?
I think it's staying out after midnight.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
They don't connect it to America yet, but it's staying out after midnight. But that's something to respect in that age, and they in turn need to respect that. You'll see them very much, their family will start coming up on the list. That's a change. When we began, you asked me if you talk about that, is there a change? When we began in 86, 87 in St. Louis, and there was a large group of us that began this, when the students would do this in the high schools, financial security would come up number 1 almost every time.
Yeah.
And I still remember the day it happened. 2 years ago, we were with a group of over 100 high school kids from all sorts of high schools in St. Louis. And what came up number 1 was family. And I just got goosebumps when I saw the kids, saying this at every table. Family was number 1. So I do see a change starting to come. But it's because we as adults, I think, have sat down with the kids and said, okay, what's important for us as individuals? What's important for us as friends? What's important for us as a community?
That's a good point. Let's listen to what a young man has to say about values. We talked with Charlie Ward, 1993 Heisman Trophy winner from Florida State, playing football. Now he's a professional basketball player with the Knicks, and we went to see him and hear what he has to say about values.
You have to have values and stick by them, not just when you're at home when your parents are always around. You just have to continue to do what's best for you and not get caught up in the peer pressure, because it's out there and you just have to do what you want to do. There's nothing wrong with going and doing different things. It's just a matter of prioritizing your life. first priority is to do well in school, study hard, and the second thing is to make friends. I think that's the most important thing once you go to school, is to socialize. Thirdly, if you want to go and party, you can go and party. Just make sure you do the first thing foremost, which is study. I think if you have God in your life and He puts certain things out there for you to reach and goals that you should reach, then, reach them and don't let anyone stop you from doing that.
That's impressive footage.
Great athlete. Cammie, we've been in hundreds of high schools, junior highs, grammar schools, in over 60 cities over the last 7 years. And when I go with the athletes, I'll always ask the students, what are some of the problems facing kids in your school, in your community? And they'll always say the same thing. They'll say drugs, they'll say violence, they'll say peer pressure, they'll say sexual pressure, and they'll say family problems at home. They'll say those always. It doesn't matter if you're in San Francisco or Jacksonville, Florida, or Houston, Texas, those will be the answers you get. And we call our series with athletes People in Your Life, because we get values through people, basically. And if you hang with the right people who can help you sort out things and can affirm the best values for you, then you're going to have a better chance of making it. Of course, you'd like to think that you'd get those values and that encouragement at home. A lot of kids don't get it at home. But get it in a church, get it in a youth group, get it find somebody you can hang with who has the good values that you'd like to have for your life, that you know are good values, and then really think through things. I mean, if you're going to reject Jesus' values, at least know what you're rejecting. Find out what it is. Don't reject a caricature of Christ. Really study His teachings. And most people agree whether they believe in Christ as Savior or not, that His teachings are the best, His values are the best. Well, find out what they are. And look into these. Think about these things. You're playing with your life. And you make some wrong decisions, it'll affect you for the rest of your life. So get together with the right people, think these things through, and realize you're in a battle, man. People are out there for your life, for your soul, for your future. Right. And you're in a battle, man. Let's get out there and win it.
And you need to equip yourself for the warfare.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you need to be comfortable that doing the right thing is not sometimes the easy thing. It's sometimes the hard thing to do.
That it is.
And you've got to have the courage to do that. And I think that's something you've got to talk through with kids, But that in the long run, getting them to think through why it's important to do that and stand up for it.
That's crucial. I think when I think of students that come into college, constantly I have them coming in, and even in a Christian liberal arts institution, you have peer pressure. And I'd like to think students, when they get to that level, they come in and they know what they're going to do, but in that midst of crowd, I see it in the first couple of weeks in school where decisions are made. And my big challenge often to them is that I want you to make an informed decision. In essence, that you think through, much as Brad was saying, you think through what you believe and what your values are, as opposed to allowing the group to make the decision. On several occasions, I have students who come in and they start their week off, and before the week is done, parents are gone, they have an earring in their ear. And many times I'll grab them, I say, oh, this is something new, what's going on? And they'll sit down and say, well, hey, me and my roommate were out at the mall on Saturday, and he got one, and I said, why not? I'll get one too. And the interesting is to talk through that process. And too many times, there was no thinking through. There was, oh, well, he did it, I did it. And usually my response in the conversation is, well, now Parents' Weekend is coming up in a couple weeks. Will the earrings stay that way? Or when are you going home next? And what's going to be the dialogue when you get there? Sad to say, too many times the response is, look, J. Anthony, by the time I go home, it's going to be out. And I'll put it back in when I get back, because I really don't want to go through that dialogue. I don't want to get into that conversation and what have you. And there, my big emphasis with them is we need to come to some understanding of what we believe and hold to it. In essence, let's be careful. I mean, I'm not going to judge a person, whether right or wrong, if they got an earring in the ear or not earring. What I am is the question of whether or not you've made some informed decision about it. And do you know why you do and why you think the way you do? Too many times, I find that we don't. We really don't. We've never given any thought to it. We sell, in essence, our integrity down the road along with everything else. And a lot of times I'm saying to students, hold it, wait a minute, hold it. Listen, okay, you made a mistake there, you didn't cross the line there, or you didn't tell the truth. That's one thing. That's an issue, okay, we'll deal with it. But in the process, don't sell your integrity. Because integrity is something that's intricately a part of who you are. And regardless of what the situation is, that you ought to come out with. Don't give it up so
Well,
freely.
Linda, don't you think that we were talking, or Brad, we were talking before about the instant gratification, the pop culture today. The kids are used to having, go home, turn on the TV, go out, get your fast food, talk to, they're not willing to wait. What do you think?
Well, that's one of the things that within the schools, especially in first grade, they realize that one of the first values is tough work. That it takes a long time to learn to read, because the children were coming in with no understanding of what it was, you know, to work hard for things, and had very much been in a watching type of a society or being taken care of, whether it's in daycare or by the parents. So very much that's one of the skills that we call them skills that we felt that the children really needed in first grade, and then it progresses as they go into middle school, into high school, into patience, into perseverance, that these are words important for you in your life and here's why. And it is something we're finding that has to be taught, because the world around them, they don't see it. Whether it's the doors opening automatically into a store. I mean, they always see doors open automatically. And I know in the airport, just coming in yesterday, you know, by the time I left, everything had been done for me.
Yes.
Well, how do you understand what you have to do for yourself so you know how to invent that door that opens up automatically?
You know, the principle of enduring is so important, because when you speak to an audience of kids, half the kids or more come from broken homes.
Yes.
And younger children, their biggest fear now, not that they'll get bitten by a dog or something, but that their parents will get a divorce. So learning how to keep a marriage together is really important to young people today, because they're all hurting from a broken home. So many are. And of course, one of the great ingredients of a healthy marriage is that we endure, that we be ready for the long haul, that we learn to deal with conflict and not let it defeat us, that we learn to deal with disappointment, we learn to deal with rejection or some failures and not let that defeat us. My motto is keep praying and keep showing up.
Keep praying and keep showing up.
Somebody,
That's
I had
good.
some shirts done like that one time. Everybody wanted them, keep praying and keep showing up. But somebody said that success is 90% showing up. And if we can't keep, you know, it's really hard sometimes when you're having trouble in a relationship to not let the pressure make you want to split from your wife or from your buddy.
And communicating too, don't you think that's
learning
important?
Learning how to deal with those pressure times so that they don't wreck the relationship. Because we have to have long-term relationships at work, in our families, in our school experience. We've got to be ready for the long haul. And there's certain characteristics and values that we need to understand. Jesus taught a lot of them about forgiving and about looking to our Heavenly Father for strength, and about Jesus can become within us a well of living water. Lots of tools that really help us with our relationships and with our long.
Tools that help us with our relationship, tools that help us to give of ourselves. Basically, what we're saying is we need to give of ourselves to other people. We're going to take a look now at Reverend Scott Larson and his halfway house that he has in Massachusetts for young people who have been in a juvenile prison. And he talks about things that have happened to them and how they have learned through giving to give to others.
I remember some years back taking 30 kids to Haiti on a mission trip. And girls, we had 19 girls sharing one shower, and they could only take a shower once a day. If they turned the water on, and a cockroach would pop out, and then the water would trickle. And no curling irons, no hair dryers. And I look back at those pictures, and we were ugly. All of us were ugly. We didn't have anything to make us look good. But as I look at the pictures of that trip, I don't see any ugly kids in those pictures. When I look into their eyes, those kids aren't ugly. They don't feel ugly. They don't feel insecure. They feel great, because they've been about something where their God is using them. They see people in a worse condition than themselves, and they're part of the solution, not part of the problem. For maybe the first time for some of them, their eyes have come off of themselves and onto somebody else. It's different when we eat a sandwich for lunch and you have 100 little stick legs watching you eat it, and you just lose your appetite. You don't feel like eating it because you can't give it to everybody else. And you start to think about, what can I give to them, as opposed to, oh, same old thing to eat again. And kids promised over and over when they came back that they were going to be different. They're going to look at the world differently. And I believe that's how we tackle and help kids tackle this whole thing of self-image, self-esteem issues, and not helping them to try to look better, but giving them a bigger cause that takes their eyes off of themselves.
Learning to give to others builds self-confidence and self-esteem. It certainly does. We certainly saw that in the example he gave.
We're seeing with research a lot of our kids are not feeling a meaning to life, and they're not valuing their life or lives of others. And that doesn't mean they're always killing somebody, but still there is a real sense of hopelessness in a lot of our kids. And when we do service learning with students, high school students, when I see them doing service learning or I hear them talk afterwards, it starts giving that meaning or purpose to life when you finally have given to others and really given of yourself.
You know, kids are made for adventure. Yes. And they want to go where the excitement is, cruise down the drag, on Saturday night because there's things happening. And so, we think maybe, well, drugs would be exciting, or sex would be exciting, or fighting or violence would be exciting, and that's the things, of course, the media is selling, and so much of peer pressure is selling. But I've taken my son, he started when he was 13, he'll be 19 this summer, and we started going in on the weekends into the inner city in Washington, D.C., in the roughest projects, picking up little rascals and taking them out for pizza and recreation and Bible study. And they were wild. We got kicked out every place we took them, and we'd go to the bowling alley, there'd be a dozen pairs of bowling shoes in the back, take them back, and then people would get those kids out. We'd go to Chuck E. Cheese, they'd say, get those kids out of here, never bring them back, It was exciting. And I remember my son saying one time when we were coming home, when he was about 13, he said, Dad, do you think this is worth it? Do you think this is going to work, But he saw those kids change then over the years, come to Christ, get their lives together, their attitudes together, be more hopeful and well-behaved, and his own faith just grew tremendously because he saw that he could have an impact on this problem we have with all these fatherless kids in the inner city. And his best buddy started going with us, and he'd hear the Bible studies, and his life totally changed. They're really tracked into helping kids now, man. That's where the action is for them, and they're becoming beautiful people in the process.
Mm-hmm. I think the converse is even true in our society, that if anything, violence is, I think, a real byproduct of a loss of identity and this process of searching. And I think all teenagers are in the process, and even beyond teenage years, are in this process of trying to find out, who am I? And they're asking some of those questions of what it is to have an identity and what does that my identity mean. But the loss of that search, when they're not in the search, or the loss of not feel like they can connect with someone, whether it's role models or what have you, then it results too many times in violence. And violence, that search of trying to find out who they are. So that today and age, I think we, whether it's parents, whether it's teachers, whether it's, I think, one-on-one, peer-to-peer, the ability to be able to sit down and have a dialogue, to be able to talk through what's going on in my life. Am I happy about it, not happy about it? If I could change it, what would I do to change it? To be able to get that dialogue started. And I think that's a part of the process of their discovery of who they are. We don't do enough today.
Well, that's what your son and his best buddy sounds like they're doing.
They discovered that they could have significance, and they could have. Kids don't have a lot of hope for the future today. There's a study done in Florida amongst high school students that shows that most of them don't feel like their lot in life will be as good as their parents. That things are going to go downhill. Yes. Well, when the kids on whom we rely for enthusiasm and confidence and hope, are depressed, we've got problems in the country. And but taking Christ's values, it's more blessed to give than receive. You can have significance. You can have a sense of self-worth. You can feel good about yourself and your relationship with God if you get out there and give to those who have less than you. And man, we're having a ball working with these interstates. We've started an academy for them now. We have a camp. We've been given a 100-acre camp.
Remarkable.
Mm-hmm. And all kinds of people are finding excitement in life working with these kids. And
you can do that whether you're in San Francisco or St. Louis or Washington, D.C.
Well, and if you meet with one or a dozen, or just to be steady with them, steady on course with them, and build a relationship.
And getting high school students to, when you talk about giving to others, looking at what values they want to pass on to others. When I talked earlier, when the high school students did their values, it was personal freedom. When they did community, it was personal freedom. When they talked about the young children they were working with at our church, their top values changed to cooperation, to kindness. Those are the values they wanted to pass on for the younger children to learn. So when you get them to look beyond themselves, even in what they want to give to others, you find that those values start coming up, that they start thinking that the world is better if it's a caring world or a more cooperative world or a kind world. So.
And lots of times I've found my young people the opportunity that as if somehow, you mean, you see value in me to give me the opportunity to give to someone else, whether it's younger or the peer, and they jump for the opportunity. And if anything, there's a sense for which one doesn't find oneself until one invests in someone or something outside of who we are.
Well, that brings up the subject of trust.
Yes.
Kids need to learn trust and then pass that on.
Well, ultimately, we have to build our lives on God, because He's one thing we can always trust. You know, your parents might not always be there. Your friends might not always be there. Your circle, you might not always be able to live up to your ideals. But God's always there. He's a constant that we can rely on. That's very important. And the kids need to know that they can, they can fail and pick things up, and with God's help, keep moving on in life. And
life isn't over because you've made one mistake.
That's right.
No, not at all. I often challenge my students that it's important that you understand that you've done your best. And it is a journey that we're on, and it's important that we're moving and progressing.
In the inner city, in the projects, programs come and go, and these kids are very reluctant to believe you're going to be there for very long. Well, when the money runs out or this government program runs out, you'll be gone. So it takes a couple of years or more to really build trust. But once they get the idea you're going to be there for the long haul, and you're not just interested in the program, you're interested in them, for no matter who they are or what they do, something really wonderful happens. They build a sense of trust and a confidence, and we need to be that kind of person for somebody else. Somebody who's going to show up over the long haul, whether we're a kid helping younger kids or whether we're an adult helping kids. We all need to get involved in some long-term show-up commitments that'll really help people become confident about the future and feel better about themselves.
Well, you talked about the battleground and being prepared for the war, and we are prepared. We can be prepared because we can make choices. Think about what you're going to do. Think about what happens if you do this or you do that, the consequences. Make the right choices, and your values will stay intact. If you're thinking about trying drugs, don't. There's a fine line between casual use and addiction, and once you've crossed that line, it's very difficult to get back. We're going to be hearing from some young people today and a football player who have tried drugs and fought back from addiction. And with me today are two gentlemen who know an awful lot about substance abuse. Sal Luca, you're a substance abuse counselor.
Yes.
And Detective Mike Miller, you're with the Sandwich Police Department.
Yes.
Welcome to the show. Sal, just what is the meaning of the word addiction?
Addiction is when you're doing something over and over again, even though the consequences for that use have been negative or harmful, and you don't stop using, whether it's a substance or some other pattern of behavior.
Do you think the people that you counsel with and talk to, do they understand addiction and what it does and what it means to them?
No, not really. What happens a lot is that because alcohol use is so much a part of our lifestyle and our culture, that it's a rite of passage. And there's always the experiment, what does this thing do for me? What does alcohol or some other drug do for me? But once they get past that experiment, that first try, there's so much pressure to go back again and to use, even if they didn't like it or if the consequences weren't very good.
How old do you see? What's the starting age, Mike, that you come across?
Oh, it's been getting younger and younger, but basically we use the rule of 7th grade, and that 12, 13 year age group for the first experimentation issues. That doesn't mean they're not younger. I've had kids younger because of older brothers and sisters or certain types of family issues which allow it. But the average age is that junior high age where the experimentation takes place.
Where are these kids picking up their drugs or their alcohol? Are they finding them at home or at school?
It's both. I think that unwittingly, families have supply for social reasons, and also for some families or some adults, they already have a dependency on alcohol, so there's a ready supply.
Yes, and I'd agree with that. Our experience, my experience as a police officer, has been investigating issues after the fact with young people, is that most of the younger kids, the 12, 13, 14-year-olds, do usually take their first drink from home. And actually, in many cases, will supply other teenagers from that alcohol from their home.
Well, now, Sal, tell me about the components of addiction. What are the components that make it up?
Well, there are 4 stages that I think I can quickly review. For a young person, and again, as Mike has said, ages...
Early as 7th grade or younger.
And we're seeing 10, 11, 12-year-olds getting a chance to experiment and see what the alcohol or drug can do for them. And by drug, I also include pot, which is very popular. And once they've found out what the drug or alcohol can do for them, then we move to the second stage, which is regular use. Now, regular use might only be once every month or once every couple of months, but that becomes a pattern. And while that isn't addiction yet, that's the start of putting it into their social life. The third phase or stage is what we call preoccupation, when a young person is starting to think about their using and their partying while it's during, let's say, the middle of the day when they're in class, or when they're, on a weekend they're just kind of daydreaming or doing something else, and they start thinking
about what they're going to do after school.
Right.
Yeah.
And or that evening, or it's Tuesday and they're thinking about Friday's party. That's preoccupation. That's not normal. That's not regular use. And for regular use for teenagers, while it's common, I don't think it's healthy and useful for them. And then I guess last but not least, after preoccupation becomes dependence. And dependence, again, is, as I was saying, the use of something that already is proven to have negative consequences, but the young person uses anyway. They have a relationship now with alcohol and or another drug. And I want to add, too, that alcohol is a drug. In our culture, we talk about alcohol as a beverage and as a sociable beverage, but it is also a drug.
Even the person who waits till 5 o'clock in the afternoon, who says, I don't need a drink when I get up first thing in the morning, but if they have to have it by 5 in the afternoon or 6 o'clock, they are addicted.
Yes.
Correct.
Sal, can you tell us a little bit about the genetic makeup of the family and what that has to do with addiction?
Well, while we know that there's a family upbringing and an environment that a young person can learn about becoming dependent on chemicals, we also know that there's a genetic susceptibility, that biologically using the drug is like a moth to flame. That once that drug is taken in, there's something that is so attractive about it, what it does for the person, that is a genetic piece. And the medical research is pretty thorough about this going through the last 30 years.
And if I may interject, as a result of that information, that when I get involved with any children, young people now, or their families, I always ask, if I'm interviewing the young person, what their family history is. And in fact, if they have a grandparent or a parent that's an addicted person that they know of, I automatically give them the pitch that they should be much more concerned about use of substances because of the potential that, eliminating all environmental factors, that they are different than kids that do not have that in their background.
So in effect, you're really counseling the whole family.
Correct.
You're interested in not only in what the children are doing, but what mom and dad and grandparents have done in the past.
Most of the parents don't even have knowledge of this information unless they've been in the field or have done some reading. But it's accepted by most of us as players in the field that genetics can and do play a factor into it.
We're going to go to Burlington, Massachusetts right now. And we're going to hear from Scott and Hannah Larson, who have started a very unique ministry of taking young people into their homes out of juvenile prison. We're going to hear from some of these young people, and Scott's going to tell us how the whole ministry began.
About 4 or 5 years ago, we had a young man in one of the Bible studies. His name was Thomas Jefferson, lived in Boston, and he had told Hannah and I that he just felt if he didn't get out and go to some place that was Christian, that he could grow in his relationship. He wasn't going to make it. And if we knew a place like that, and we said, we don't know of any place like that, but we'll pray for you as you go back home. He said, I don't think I can make it. There's too many people who are after me. And we read about Thomas about 2 weeks after he was released and went back home, that he'd been found in a neighborhood castrated with a bullet through the back of his head. He didn't have an option. And Hannah and I began to pray that God would raise up something for those kids who have a real heart for God, who want to go on with God, but don't have options. And we're sitting in the answer to that prayer in this home. And so that's what Straight Ahead Ministries offers people is people. Somebody to walk alongside, to be a father, to be a friend. And that's where the body of Christ needs to raise up one at a time, one person that will be there for one young person. Otherwise, those dreams are not going to happen. With the kids that we work with, I've yet to meet a kid who doesn't hate his father. Maybe I can count them on one hand. Usually there's a pronounced hatred for all authority in their life because the first authority wasn't there. They hate every other authority. It's also the biggest kind of rejection that a young person can have is the rejection of a father, either an absent father or a father who wasn't at home, didn't care about him in the minds of the young person, tells them that they're unworthy. 94% of incarcerated teens have never had one positive adult role model. And when we have people go in and lead Bible studies, they're people who are relational and care about the kids. Kids say, well, why are you here? Do you get paid to do this? And they say, no, we care about you. That's why we're here. And so that begins to break down a lot of barriers, and they begin to form a relationship with somebody who's positive, sometimes for the first time in their life.
Growing up as a kid, my mother used drugs as well as sold drugs, and did a lot of alcohol with her, her sisters and brothers, my aunts and uncles, and I saw that at a very young age. So I pretty much thought that's what everybody did, because I saw it like every single day. And then as I got more older and the situations with my mother became more difficult, it became more like an obsession, or more like I had to do it to get away from the feelings I had for my mother and life in general and other people and situations in my neighborhood.
Growing up, I had a mother and father, but my father was a workaholic as well as an alcoholic. So he wasn't home a lot, and most of the time I'd see him, he'd be at work. When he got off work, he went straight to the bar, so I didn't really see him at night. And when I went out, it was just like I'd be with my friends, and some of them would get mixed up into we're getting mixed up with marijuana and drinking and stuff. So, I figured, well, my father drinks, so I don't see why I shouldn't drink.
The easiest kids to deal with, I think, are kids that are locked up. Everybody has to hit the bottom before they're really receptive to Christ. It's one of the difficulties sometimes for kids growing up in the church is that they haven't necessarily hit the bottom yet. For a kid to be locked up in a cell in a room, sometimes 19 and 20 hours a day, that's the bottom for a kid. They know that it's not working. They're 14, 15 years old, and this is where life has taken them.
Then after a while, I did it so much, I became dependent on it, the alcohol and the drugs, to really calm me down and make me feel relaxed. It was almost like, a friend, my second friend. It was my best friend. They didn't talk back and just did what I wanted to do, so that's what that was fine with me. And then the more I used, the more depressed I became, the more angry I became, the more crimes I did, and as a result of that, I became more sloppier. I didn't really care about, what I did or everyday things.
So I was throwing parties and stuff, and, I didn't know what I was doing, and I couldn't recognize what I was feeling that much because, I didn't know. I was depressed. I was, that my family life was screwed up, and I just drank to cover it up, get high when I was feeling real bad, and, just put it off for another day. Well, basically, it took getting locked up to get out of it. I didn't recognize that I was in that much trouble before I was locked up. if you keep using drugs or alcohol, someday you will end up getting locked up, and that's not what you need to check yourself.
I think about a study done with high school kids, high school church kids, in fact, and they were asked, what's the biggest problem with high school kids today? And their third place answer was, in fact, drug abuse. Second place was problem with parents. They had two things that were tied for first place. One was loneliness and not having anything important to do. And so our approach and my approach has tended to be helping the kids with those first two things. The loneliness, that God has something himself wants to fill you, fill that loneliness, that deep sense that when you're all alone, it's empty. And that's why kids drink, that's why they take drugs, that's why they fall into peer pressure, that's why they break the law. There's this emptiness that's in them that they can't shake. The second thing is having nothing important to do. Kids know that there's problems in this world that are so big, but they also realize that there's nothing that they can really do about it. And so there's a hopelessness that what could I possibly do to make a difference?
My denial, it took a while for me to get out of that denial. I was still in that stage. I had to really realize that I was being dependent on it because I didn't want to feel like I was being, powerless to a drug or some kind of substance. So it took me a while to really understand that I was dependent on that. It was controlling me versus me controlling it. And after understanding that, I realized I had to find other alternatives for me to depend on people. I had to depend on people I trusted because I knew I had to find a way. I couldn't do it all by myself.
Well, while I was locked up, they assigned us people to talk to and, therapists. And my therapist was great. She understood everything, and, I was able to open up to her after a while. I wasn't used to having someone, ask me questions about my life, and it felt good after a while. It's like relieving myself of this heavy burden. My number one dependency now is Jesus Christ, because He's the one that eases all that pain, and when all fails, He's always there, because He said He'll never leave or forsake us. So that was my main theme now, and I use that. And once in a while I get little cravings and stuff, but I pray about it and I talk to other people about it, and the cravings aren't really that bad. Christ gave me the strength to just go and not fall into the negativity, and I thank Him for it. He saved my life.
I believe that every young person, by the time they're 18, 19, by the time they leave home, by the time they graduate from school, has to have three things in their life. I'd say the first thing is that they need to have a genuine personal encounter with Jesus Christ. It's not my parents' encounter, it's not what my church says, my youth leaders encounter, however much I respect them, but I personally have had an encounter with Jesus Christ. Second thing I believe that they have to have is a dream. Every kid needs a dream that there's a purpose for me, that there's something for me to get up in the morning for, that God has given, I'm not a mistake, that He has me here for something. And most kids have no sense of that at all. In fact, I asked it in one of the juvenile prisons, what do you think, do you have a dream? And one of the kids said, no, that's why we're here. If we had a dream, you think we'd be here? Locked up. I believe the third element that kids need to have by the time they move out of high school and on in their life is an adult who believes in them. Someone who will walk alongside of them and really believe in them. I remember growing up myself, I had a lot of self-esteem problems. In 8th grade, I had an ulcer from an insecurity and an inferiority complex. Hated myself. I always compared myself to everybody else, and I always came up short. My worst to everybody else's best. And I remember being one time working for a gentleman who was like a father figure to me. I lived there for the summer and worked on his farm. And my parents were visiting there. They were friends, and I was sleeping in the living room, and they didn't think I was hearing their conversation. But my mother asked Larry, the gentleman who I was working for, she asked him, you think Scott will make it? You think Scott's really going to make it? What do you really think about him? And she thought I was sleeping, and so did he. So I was very interested in his response to that question. I respected him greatly. And he said, someday Scott will be the president of General Motors. And, hearing that brought me to a whole different level, that somebody believed in me, who wasn't my parent. They weren't paid to believe in me. Somebody I respected greatly, who, not even knowing I was listening, believed in me. Scott, someday, he'll be the president of General Motors. Every kid needs to have somebody walk alongside them, an adult, who believes in them, who believes in their dream.
We heard Scott talk about the importance of the role model, the adult walking alongside the child. Mike, what's been your experience in that?
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly that the first step, of course, is the home, and that's crucial. The responsibility of parents to set values and to set standards for their kids to live up to. But I also think that most kids, at some point as they get older, will look outside their immediate home for the support they need to go on, and that's where that third party, that person that is available to them that is outside their immediate home, is crucial.
What about these children? How can we help them solve? What's the way that the best they can be served with counseling help? Are we in the business of getting them well?
Well, first of all, alcoholism or chemical dependency is a disease, and it's a disease of denial. It's a disease of forgetting that they have a disease. It's a disease of numbing. We heard one young man say that he didn't recognize what was going on, and he didn't feel his feelings.
Yeah.
And what recovery is about is not taking or looking at it as a bad person becoming good. It's looking at it, the situation, as a sick person becoming well, because it is a disease. Now, illegal and immoral things happen when somebody's under the influence of and abusing chemicals, but that doesn't mean that they're a bad person. They are needing to get well. And the examples of the young men we saw and of the leader, Scott, I think, pointed the way out.
Do you find that there is a lot of denial, Mike, when you talk to the parents and the children? Are they in any kind of reality?
Most parents will absolutely vehemently deny that their son or daughter has an alcohol or drug issue when they're first approached on it. It's probably the worst thing a parent can imagine is going on. And so we have to get over that. And the sad reality from my point of view, being a police officer, is that many times it cannot be got over through discussion, and we may have to rely on more aggressive tactics to bring it to a head in order for it to be addressed.
Scott mentioned at the end about the children being bored, that they were lonely and that they didn't have anything to get up for in the morning. Is that what you're seeing when you talk to the kids at school?
That's their complaint, and that perception is very real to them. While myself or Mike might see that there are a lot of opportunities out there, that's not what they're seeing. And I think the job of prevention is to get them activated and get them involved with using what they've got, their own talents.
For instance, getting involved in a scout program or getting involved in an athletic program or after-school sports?
My opinion is that the availability of resources is there. As Sal said, the perception of the individual involved may be that it's not there, or that those things aren't attractive to them. But I don't think it's an issue of creating new things. I think it's an issue of getting them more involved and looking at what exists and the value of getting involved with anything that involves group activities or other people.
The easiest club to get into is the drinking, drugging club.
Yeah.
Now, the other things which are more challenging, whether it's an extracurricular activity or just trying something new, that's what a young person needs to do to replace the drinking and drugging. And that's a real difficult step sometimes. But Scott also mentioned, and I think we're in agreement, that when somebody believes in a young person, that's enough perhaps to give them the confidence to try. And maybe they won't succeed the first time, but knowing that somebody's behind them and really believes in them, that might make the difference.
And I think developing that self-confidence, whether it's an adult that's lost it or whether it's a young person who hasn't developed it yet, is crucial. I usually don't deal with people or kids that are very strong, have very good self-esteem. I usually don't deal with them in a negative way.
Teachers are important, don't you think? The schools have more of a responsibility perhaps today of providing that counselor person, or is there not time? Is there time for kids to develop a relationship with a teacher?
That's been an issue, as you probably know. Schools are trying to pull out of the business of counseling. They feel their role should be more of just teaching.
Oh, really?
And I think that is one of the facets that's changed in recent years, which has hurt not help the problem.
Maybe I'm thinking back to our childhood when your teacher was your friend and pal.
Correct, yeah.
What about the peer leadership programs that are being done in the schools?
Young people that are interested in and involved, they're the ones that are saving themselves, so to speak. And I'm always interested in having the seeds planted, so for somebody who is on the fence or someone who is using and abusing, maybe it'll take and it will work for them. But I want to also add that I think that the kids that want to get help really, they've hit a turning point and they're ready now, and they're going to do anything they can and anything they need to get, to stay clean and sober, so to speak, and to start a new life.
And those kids are the very kids that are going to help the ones down below, younger than they are.
Right.
Churches have come forward also.
Oh, have they?
Excuse
me.
Yes,
Good.
no, it's good.
Go ahead. What were you going to say, Mike?
No, I was going to say churches have stepped up and are trying to offer more at a younger age. And I have to emphasize the fact of the younger age. From a prevention point of view, at 16 years old, the damage is done, and it's more reactive from my point of view. The concentration has to be at those ages of that 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade from outside agencies, and even before that, from a parent point of view, it should be there before that. By age 7, they should have their values somewhat established if their parents are doing the job, and then the school and the other agencies should support those values, and that really, we have some problems nowadays with that.
Yeah, working together. They need
Correct.
to work together as a team. It's a team effort. Church, family, school. Lots of times, though, mother and fathers aren't there. They're working, and then the kids are, their teacher is the television set, and then that brings up another whole subject
And
of
that's
the media.
an important one. The consensus right now in our profession is that when young people tell their story to other young people, as we saw today, that is as strong a message as any TV media message. And that's where the action is. Someone else who's had that experience and can tell you what it's like. Because the media are powerfully trying to influence, to create consumers.
I'm sure you've all heard of Bruce Harper, NFL football player. He was heavily into drugs, came out of it, and he's got a personal testimony. Let's watch Bruce Harper talk about his addiction to drugs.
Bruce Harper, like Jerry Rice and Phil Simms, is a great football player who came from a small college football program. As a New York Jet, Harper became only the 5th player to reach 2,000 total yards twice in a career. And in 1978, he led the NFL in combined yardage, including records for both punt and kickoff returns.
I remember we were playing against the Houston Oilers at Shea Stadium, and I had a chance at the end of the game. It was a tie score. Very little time was left, and they called my play. It was 45 A-screen right to the A-back. And I caught the pass, and I ran 45 yards for a touchdown with like no time left. It seemed like the whole team just came in and mobbed me, and we were laughing in there, and they picked me up, and it was just a great, great feeling. I mean, it was just so much fun.
However, Bruce's career hasn't been all highlights.
At what point in your life did you experiment with drugs? How did that start?
When I was a youngster, I guess I was under the same peer pressure as kids are today. When I was in high school, I started experimenting with drugs. Of course, with marijuana started it off, and then it goes on to bigger and more dangerous drugs. And I think about all the time I wasted and all the money I wasted using drugs, and there's no telling the other people that I hurt, being a role model. Maybe I influenced someone else to try drugs. And there's nothing positive you can say about drugs at all. I got away with it, so to say. But no, I didn't. I'm still paying for it. And again, I know firsthand that it's not cool. A lot of people think it's cool, It's not cool. And I'm just sorry I ever got started. I do praise God because I was able to make it out of that. And I no longer have to live under those circumstances. And I'm still alive to go out and tell other people, about the dangers.
Well, what caused you to stop doing drugs?
Well, the thing that caused me to stop using drugs, believe it or not, well, it's easy to believe, I learned to trust in the Lord Jesus Christ. And, at that time I was playing professional football, making a little money, living the high life, the fast lane, and what have you. And I had a couple of friends that encouraged me, they saw the direction I was going in, and they encouraged me to stop doing that and to consider the things the Lord said, looking at Scripture. I learned a little bit about the Bible and the gospel, and finally one day I just decided, this is not right. I can't claim to know and love the Lord and then continue my life the way I was doing. And so I just decided I have to stop doing this.
Were you tempted to ever start doing drugs again?
I was tempted again, and that just kind of goes to show you the dangers and how easy it is to become addicted without even realizing it. After having stopped for a few years, just say 5 or 6 years, I was still tempted on occasion, even with cigarette smoking. Again, I always say, don't even bother getting started, because the only thing you ever hear from people that are doing it is that they wish they could quit.
You talk to kids in schools a lot, Bruce. What advice would you give to them to make it, to get through these hard teenage years?
Well, when I think about teenagers today growing up in the environment they are, with the peer pressure, all the different temptations and what have you, I believe sincerely, first of all, that God has blessed each one of us. There's no question about it. I think, number one, the one gift He has given us is the gift of time. And it's up to us to use that time constructively. I don't think we should use it destructively. But along with the time, He has given us other gifts and talents. And it's up to us to find out what they are and to use them and develop them. I'd encourage kids to find their gifts and to find their talents and to use them for their own good, and even God will be glorified through it. God made us for a reason. It's up to us to find out what that reason is.
We heard what Bruce said, and he had some good advice for the kids. What kind of advice do you have, Sal and Mike, for our listeners?
Well, I would tell the kids the same thing I tell them whenever I close a program, is that they're living in a system and a society that has many more stresses than I had to deal with, and they have to look into themselves and become stronger as individuals and not be afraid to state that and to expand upon that with other kids and call upon adults for help and ask for help and not be ashamed of that. And that will usually lead them in the right way.
Let's face it, the opportunities to use alcohol or other drugs are out there so greatly that an experiment is bound to happen for the best kids and for the kids most vulnerable. But there's nothing that the alcohol or drug can do for any young person that a good relationship or an involvement with something that helps them use their talents. There's nothing that the alcohol or drug can do to match that. Can't hold a candle to it.
Well, thank you for sharing with us today. There are other alternatives to drugs. You can get involved with younger children, get involved at your church, get involved in your neighborhood. You don't have to do drugs. It's not worth it.